welcome to a Green and Gold FC mini episode. We are glad to be joined by Alex, our regular co-host, and Jack from Hancock Analysis, analysis for Portsmouth or Pompey FC. And we are just going to discuss some of the latest transfer rumours with Portsmouth, including the landed deal of Adrien Seasich, and why Portsmouth is so interested in Aussies. How are you going, Alex?
Yeah, cheers, Graham. Always good to be back. This episode discussing Portsmouth. I think this is a squad that pretty much anyone interested in Australian football has been following for just over a year now. Even more so now with the introduction of Adrien Seasich. Very much excited to be joined by yourself and Jack today to discuss, well, I guess Australia's newest sweetheart in the English Championship. And yeah, let's get into it.
Thanks, Alex. And welcome, Jack. Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
No, thanks for having me. I'm not sure whether I'm the sweetheart or Adrien Seasich is the sweetheart, but I'm going to go with me being the sweetheart in this conversation.
There is now an incredible link between Australia and Portsmouth, and there has historically been too, right? You have Eloise, Popovich, I'm sure many others. And when I moved to Southampton, someone told me that Southampton gave birth to the USA and Portsmouth gave birth to Australia. Does that explain the link?
I think it must do, right? And I know what nation I prefer. I much prefer Australia to the US. So, yeah, that checks out in my opinion, definitely.
So in all seriously, we are now up to 4 Portsmouth players, and hopefully this year we can be injury-free. And you, I believe, you've watched a lot of the A-League and watched a lot of these players. Can you tell us about Adrien Seasich? What do you think his strengths are? What do you think his ceiling is? And what would be a pass score, assuming he stays fit for his first season at Pompey?
Yeah, I try and watch 3 or 4 games per player for the scouting reports I do. So back in January, I watched 3 Sydney games for Hayden, 3 Brisbane games for Tommy. Again, it was 3 Sydney games for Adrian just over the last couple of days, and I do really like the A-League. I think it's it's not faultless, but there's a lot of fun players. Joe Lolly is a player I do quite like to watch, but Adrien Seasich, he gets goals. He's a natural born winner, is what I call him. He's got a good personality in terms of he's a bit aggressive. He's combative. He'll get in your face with and without the ball. He'll work hard, and he's just got an incredible relationship with the football, especially on his left foot. I mean, you look at the goals catalogue. That's not chance or luck. That's a lot of skill. And I think in terms of his ceiling, I think I'd need to see him in a championship context because of he's not slow and he's not agile, but he's not like super fast. And you do obviously need that power in the championship. If he can improve his athleticism or he makes the leap relatively seamlessly to the championship, I see a world in which he plays upper championship, potentially a lower Premier League team picks him up in about 3 years' time. That's obviously best case scenario, but it's, Portsmouth has got an awful record over the last 5 years of injuries. The Australian boys, they all get one big injury when they come over, it seems. So if he stays fit and he kind of gets firing early and Mousinho plays him in a way that suits him, it's a cliche, but I think the sky's the limit for him. I think he's an incredibly talented footballer and a great personality.
So I read your scouting report on Adrien Seasich, and one thing I thought was really interesting is I had a concern that he was a bit of a low-touch player, which I thought meant that he could improve a lot off the ball and try and open passing lanes and get involved and build up a lot more. Because I've seen a lot of players, Dennis John Rue is one that springs to mind, who go to Europe and however many touches they get per 90 drops quite a bit because there's less time and space. But you actually saw that as a positive. Could you explain that?
Yeah, so I think to relate it back to another player we signed last season was Elias Sorensen, who I think is a very talented footballer. He was playing in, I think it was the second or third tier of Danish football, attack midfielder, striker, winger, had loads of touches, loads of time. And he brought up the goods. His record speaks for itself, but he came over here and it's very apparent very quickly you do not get that time, you do not get that space. And he just couldn't put it together because he's not stupid, but his brain couldn't work quick enough to get, to shift the ball out of his feet and make things happen. Whereas Adrien, as you say, a lot of players who might have high touches in the A-League, they come to Europe and it's like, oh, well, I've now not got that space. With Adrien, he's not a player that relies on having loads of the ball. As I've said in the article, A-League space is quite big and you do get quite a lot of time. But I think watching his games, his brain works really quickly, his feet work really quickly. Although it would be good to see him get more involved in build-up and playmaking. I think the adaptation period should hopefully be quicker because of that, if that makes sense.
So a lot of A-League fans, in particular Sydney FC fans, are always quick to tell me that they see Adrien Seasich as more of a sort of impact player. Obviously has great value as a starter, but has real sort of impact coming off the bench. Do you see that sort of role, him filling in at Portsmouth, being that sort of impact player off the bench, or do you really feel that he can maybe net into that starting 11, not necessarily straight away, but maybe at a point through the season? Do you reckon he's going to become more of a starting player, or do you reckon he's sort of more filling in that impact role for now?
It's a good question, and I think it's a fair critique. Not critique, but a fair appraisal of Adrian as a player. It's hard to see where he'll immediately, where he'll like, some players go, all right, you'll absolutely be a centre back for us, or you'll be a, whatever. Whereas him, he can play as a number 10, or he can play as right wing. I think I'd probably see him as a right winger for us, kind of drifting inside and having like a really aggressive overlapping fullback. At right wing at the moment, we've got Matt Ritchie, obviously was at Newcastle for ages, Bournemouth. We signed him last season. He came, it's a bit of a homecoming story. So there won't be that immediate pressure for him to be like, oh, you're the main guy. Go out and, get us 18 goals a season, whatever we got in the A-League. But I think if he starts well off the bench, there is definitely a reality in which he goes and cements his place sooner rather than later.
So you mentioned the injury toll, and we have watched all of our players, Waddingham, Yengi, Matthews, and of course Farrell have very, very long injuries. How much is that something that Australian clubs could improve on their sides, preparing Aussie players to be more injury resistant? And how much is that something which is just bad luck, or something which maybe even Portsmouth could perhaps improve?
Yeah, I mean, my background isn't in sports science or physiotherapy, so I can only say so much and not, I can't fully present it as fact. I think with Hayden Matthews, the injury wasn't one of them that makes you go, oh, he's already injury prone, or oh, he's made of glass. It was a complete contact injury, out of his control. He still soldiered on and finished the game. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Jacob Farrell, a little bit more concerning because of his knee injury in the past before we signed him. Probably should have got surgery far quicker than he did, but we kind of ummed and ahed and gone, maybe he'll be back for February or whatever. Ultimately, we had to bite the bullet later on and go, actually, surgery is the only appropriate method. Tommy, I think with Waddingham, it's a case of just the Championship in the EFL is so different physically to the A-League, and it's way more intense and loads more running. And he keeps picking up, I think it's little hamstring injuries and calf injuries, which is one of them where you just kind of need to give it time. And you need to just bet, which is why I'm against loaning him out straight away, because I feel if we loan him out, he's going to be expected to play back-to-back 90s in League One, for example, and he'll just get loads of hamstring injuries again. So that is one of them where it's time. I think there's been a lot of critique of Portsmouth in the past over our training pitches at the training ground. I'm not sure how much I put into that, because you hear, one side will say, oh, it's the training pitches, but they've probably got a bit of an agenda in terms of they're not entirely happy with the ownership, for example. And you get the other people, which is people at the club, will go, actually, it's not entirely the case. So I think it depends who you listen to. Can the club do more? Yeah, probably. But equally, I think sometimes it's just a case of the A-League is way less intense than the Championship. I mean, look at Hayden Matthews when he came over. He immediately said the pitches are way heavier, and it caused him loads of calf cramps. So I think it's just a culture thing and a climate thing more than anything else.
Yeah, Jack, I think you make a really interesting point there, sort of more on the intensity of the Championship. Obviously, we know it's a 46-game season compared to the A-League's 27. You have the Carabao Cup, obviously the FA Cup, all these various competitions that they're going through. It's a much tighter schedule. And I also think a good point is sort of the notice that, when you do look at someone like Thomas Waddingham picking up these sort of hamstring injuries, these calf injuries, which are probably clear signs of, overloading, overworking compared to what he's used to, it does sort of highlight the big difference between playing your sort of junior football in, North Queensland compared to playing at a high intensity in probably the best second division in world football. But I think that with Adrien Seasich, he's probably the only of the Aussies that I'm not going to say guaranteed, but I'm fairly confident he won't have as much of a struggle with injury, purely for the fact that he has had that European sort of experience before, obviously with his most recent spell out on loan in the Netherlands as well, before he sort of broke through with Sydney this year. But yeah, I do feel like that's a big sort of difference with a lot of Aussies that tend to jump ship just overseas in general, not only over to England, but you look at some of the main ones, you look at the likes of Riley McGree, with all the injury troubles he's had at Middlesbrough. I think English football is probably one of the most grueling schedules across, the entire world of football, to be honest. So it doesn't surprise me that a lot of the Aussies going over go from a fairly light 27 league game schedule to then jump to a 46 league game schedule and then cup competitions on top of that. I do feel like this is something that maybe needs to be addressed if we are going to be looking at sort of the progression of a lot of Australian youngsters to Europe. But with Adrien, I'm really hoping that he can sort of forego this curse that's been placed upon Australian Portsmouth players when it comes to long-term injuries.
Yeah, for sure. I think another thing with Adrien is, as you say, he's got history in Europe, which is great and shows his robustness. Also, he's a player who, from what I can see, is quite naturally combative. He doesn't shy away from contact. He knows what he's doing with his body, and he's not stupid in the way he uses his energy. Like, he won't charge around and just burn himself out immediately. So I think he comes across the place quite responsible and is quite used to contact and things like that, which, as you say, hopefully should help his transition.
So let's talk about the A-League and how it's becoming a development league. You saw Sydney FC, a few games for them. Now, of course, that's unfortunate. They're a basket case of a club at the last season. They're very pretty in attack, but completely dysfunctional in defence at all levels, not their press and the back line as well. However, our league needs to start developing these players in order to survive and selling them better. And I saw some very interesting scouting reports from yourself, as well as Caleb Wilkins, who's been looking at our league in detail. And I noticed that he critiqued Milanovic on taking way too many low XG shots, which he said would not scale up to a higher level. And it had me thinking, like, are there any patterns about the A-League, things that we could change, any sort of player which we could produce better, which would help us produce players which would scale up better, take that next level up, and possibly prepare them better for European football?
Yeah, I do somewhat agree with the shooting thing, but equally I like long shots, so I'm not sure we should be writing off players that shoot from range a lot. I think we should embrace fun, if anything. What really struck me is, obviously, on the ball, it's quite impressive. I look at like Leo Senya for Sydney. I really like watching him. He's a really fun player. A lot of good attackers as well. But as you say, the press often got broke a lot. They were very open in transition, kind of just got run. It was just kind of like a basketball game, back to back to back. But the issue is, for me anyway, the pitches looked quite big and the players looked quite small in terms of their athleticism wasn't quite there, which kind of tracks when you move over to Europe and they look like they're maybe a player who looks quick in the A-League, doesn't quite make that transition over. So I think athletic types would do well, especially if that might mean if you build more athletic players, they should hopefully become more physically robust, which in turn should hopefully help with the injuries. But I've not watched enough to be a real expert and go, right, here's what I can diagnose your issues with your league. But I do have concerns over the athleticism, and I think that's an area. I think football's getting more athletic generally as well. So if Australia and the A-League can get ahead of that, I think you can have a real profitable decade.
Just touch on that idea there of what we can sort of do on improving the quality of players that head over to Europe. And to be honest, I think a lot of that is sort of down to the whole... Let's be honest here. Australian football has done everything in its power to move across to a more European style of producing youngsters and having, bringing them through to senior level and the kind of football that we play and what we're promoting at the, at a national scale. In terms of youth football, I think the big difference is just the fact that the schedules are so completely different. You're easily playing twice as much football per year in Europe comparatively to what you're playing in Australia. And I think that is probably detrimental when you look at the development of these young players on a technical level, on an experience level. One of the big key things that I sort of pride myself on as a coach is the importance of match experience and how crucial it is for youth player development. The fact that we don't have that extended run during the season in Australia compared to what you do in the UK, I think is the biggest damaging factor in terms of why we can't produce these top quality youngsters that are then going to go over to Europe and be able to smash it over there. Obviously, some of them do. You have the likes of Connor Metcalf. He does quite well with St. Pauli. You have Nectarios Triantis. Obviously, he made a really good jump recently. But on a larger scale, it's hard to say that a lot of Aussies that do jump from the A-League directly to a European league with a heavy schedule, it's hard to say that a large amount of them do actually do well. A lot of them will either crumble due to injuries, struggle to find consistency, or they're just not able to cope with the pressure of having to play this extended schedule. This is something that needs to be addressed, and once it is addressed, I think we'll see a much more consistent level of high quality players produced.
Yeah, I think that sums it up really well. And I think a lot of it does come down to culture and footballing culture and past experience. I mean, you look at it from a kid in England, you're playing, not me, I was rubbish at football, so I never got in the team, but you're playing every week in these horrible pitches and it's really intense. And Australia, the credit to your youth setup, you produce a lot of very, very good technical footballers. I'm not going to call them soft. That's I don't like that kind of language. But I think that you're not used to the intensive back-to-back nights. You're going through these awful pitches, you're getting pushed, kicked, whatever. And I think, I completely agree. That's something that can be done to really help the problem.
So in your recent articles, you highlighted quite a few other Aussie players which you'd like to see at Portsmouth. Could you tell any which you'd really like Pompey to land?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of them, in that recruitment article that you're referencing, a lot of it was data searches. So I didn't have time to go through loads and loads of matches, but I like Clayton Taylor. I think he's at Newcastle Jets. I like Ryan Teague, who I can't remember where he is, but he is
Victory.
Victory is, I believe, he's off to Wrexham, so now it's another. Can't compete that kind of money down here. Who else? Archie Goodwin ranked very highly for strikers that I looked at on my metrics. Very good finisher from what I've seen. Bit of an all-rounder, still young. Obviously, his issue is his contract's super long. I mean, it's like 3 years, but whatever. Yeah, they're probably the three. I think, yeah, Teague, Clayton Taylor, and Archie Goodwin, but also Alex Robertson. I'd love to see Alex Robertson back in the Portsmouth shirt. I'm not sure how likely that is based on the fee would be required, but that's the dream, right?
Maybe you guys could convince him to play for Australia again.
Yeah, we'll see. If we can get him in the building at Portsmouth, then I'll try and convince him to come and play for you guys again.
I need you boys to do a double swoop for Triantis and Robertson. You got to build that future Socceroos midfield pairing for us.
It's a good combo. I like that. Yeah.
So do you reckon we could see 4 in a starting 11 sometime this season?
Yes, I think the only one is Wadders. I'm not sure where. I think we should probably keep him for now, and I believe Mousinho said he's seasoned for the first team this season. I think you'll definitely see it, providing he actually plays football for us. Jacob Farrell, Hayden Matthews, and Sega could definitely start for us. So I think you're guaranteed 3. I think 4 could be a push, but I think 3 is pretty likely, yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Jack, from Hancock Analysis. You can find him at Hancock Analysis, and of course you can find us at greenandgoldfc.com, as well as on Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. That's all we have time for today, but until next time, thank you, and it's bye for now.